Hello everyone, welcome to The Green Man. Hope you're all good and well. So following on from my album review of Fit For An Autopsy's Oh What The Future Holds on Friday, I'm now going to be ranking their albums from my least favourite to my favourite. There are 6 full-length studio albums I'm dealing with here. I'm not including the EP that they did back in 2009, Hell on Earth. So, Fit For An Autopsy are labelled very much as, they get the deathcore label really, but they have very much expanded their sound, as I mentioned in my review, really, to adopt a much more kind of bigger, grander, more atmospheric style, using sort of even techniques that we would hear from bands like Gojira. Even on their most recent album, I identified a little bit of Meshuggah here and there too. And so, Fit For An Autopsy, certainly the band moving with the times. And I have found this, to be the case, particularly with, I'd say, their last 2 or 3 albums, and especially since signing up to Nuclear Blast, where I think they have now seen a much bigger surge in their popularity. So let's start this ranking the albums off with my least favourite album, which is going to be Hellbound. Now, for me, just of their 6 albums, this is the one I'm probably least likely to go back to. If you asked me to put on a Fit For An Autopsy record, I don't think I would put on Hellbound personally. It does show quite a lot of promise in places. Actually, I really like the kind of middle part of this album. There are a couple of tracks that I particularly do really like. I mean, Dead in the Dirt, There Is Nothing Here Worth Keeping, for me really show that band's ability almost from the earliest part of the band's formation to come up and forge really memorable riffs and carefully considered and well put together songs in their albums. But as a whole, though, the main issue I have with this album is it feels, out of all their albums, the most entrenched in the kind of deathcore kind of style, with lots of blast beats those kind of really chunky riffs, which you really characterise with deathcore as a genre. And for me, it feels a little predictable at times as well. But it's not a bad album at all. It just comes here as my least favourite. So next up is The Great Collapse from 2017, and a pretty solid album here, actually. This is one I do quite like, and, I can stick on and kind of enjoy it. It has, I think, one of my favourite Fit For An Autopsy songs on here, which is Black Mammoth. Also, Iron Moon is a really good track too. And this is, for me, where they really started to get more into that blend of their deathcore sound with the more atmospheric expansiveness that they were going for. And we see that a lot, I think, more in this album with tracks like When the Bulb Burns Out and Empty Still, where they showcase that a bit more. But for me, those kind of tracks on this album, they don't really do an awful lot for me. There's quite a lot of build up, and it doesn't feel like there's too much payoff with those tracks, I think. At least that's how I feel. And the album as a whole, therefore, I feel like it feels like Fit For An Autopsy version 2.0, but they haven't quite found their real potential yet with The Great Collapse for me, which was to come, of course, on the later albums, which I will be coming to soon. Next up, coming in at number 4, is Absolute Hope, Absolute Hell from 2015. Now, this is a decent album. I could see many people perhaps choosing this even as their favourite album, maybe. This was the introduction of Joe Badalato on the vocals for this album. Some really great tracks. I did find this tough to put forth, but as I say, I think I maybe just prefer the other 3 albums on this list slightly more. And you've got really good tracks here like Ghosts in the River and Out to Sea, where we see that first bit, for me, that first sign of experimentation from them of going into that newer sound. So I do like Absolute Hope, Absolute Hell, particularly the title track, right? That's a banger. But for me, a lot of this album is kind of, I again, a bit like my criticism of Hellbound, I found it a little bit predictable in places, to be quite honest. But it's not too bad an album. It's a pretty good one, actually, to be fair. So next up, we have their most recent release, which of course I showed off on CD the other day, What the Future Holds, coming in at number 3. And I did give this a really good score, so perhaps you might have thought it might have made my number 1 or even my number 2. But going back through their discography, there were 2 albums in it, and they just stood out for me a little more, and I think I would go back to them just as an instinct, because I haven't had a lot of time with this. Obviously, it was only out since Friday, and I've listened to it, several times. So this is almost more instinctive. But I don't think I would go back to it quite as much as my top two on this list. But there's a lot of great songs here, as I alluded to in my review. Far From Heaven, with that really awesome rhythm, really stompy. Two Towers is a great track. A High Level of Hate has the sugar kind of sensibility to it. Conditional Healing, the final track, The Man That I Was Not, I think is actually one of the highlights for me as well on this album. A really good way to close the album with a slower, much more moodier vibe, but still a really big, and the track still has that aggression, but also has a slightly doomy feel to finish off that particular album. Now, next up at number 2, I have chosen The Process of Human Extermination, their debut album here. And perhaps this is the biggest surprise, because a lot of people say Fit For An Autopsy just get better and better. I went back to the debut album, and I must admit, I think I'd only heard the odd track from this one before, so this was almost like visiting this a little bit anew for me. I realised just how good this is. This is a really good album. Just surprised that, the band's ability here, that it's full of shorter, punchier tracks. There's lots of really good changes. I think that the technique and the different technical kind of styles that they're using on this album are more creative than you might expect from your average deathcore band. And there's just a lot more on offer here than I was really expecting from their first album, where I thought maybe this is going to be the album that I like the least. Really not what happens at all. It's actually potentially one of the albums, and like I say, it's the runner-up here, so it's actually one of my favourite Fit For An Autopsy albums. I really think that no track here really overstays its welcome. It's a great album, and I do hope it gets a little bit more kind of respect even as we go forward. As more people discover Fit For An Autopsy and their discography, hopefully they will realise how good this debut album is. It took me a bit by surprise. Lots of great tracks. I would give shout outs to The Desecrator, The Juggernaut, and The Consumer. Check those 3 out. They are fantastic. So my number 1 choice, therefore, we're only left with one album, and that is, of course, none other than 2019's The Sea of Tragic Beasts. For me, firmly establishing them in that grander, bigger sounds that they tinkered with a bit in the previous album, The Great Collapse. But this really came through strong for me with, I think, I probably enjoy all 10 tracks on this album, but there are several that I think are really brilliant. That starting track, The Sea of Tragic Beasts, with that opening kind of really low sounding riff, and it's really quite hooky and memorable. What a way to begin this album. It's so memorable, and it's the kind of riff that when you're not thinking of anything, that riff will suddenly come in your head out of nowhere, because it's almost slightly the dum 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 dum. It just goes over and over in my head once I start thinking about it. Great way to sort of really stamp your mark on an album. I could have actually included that in my list of killer opening tracks the other day, actually thinking about it. But anyway, you've got Your Pain Is Mine, Mirrors. I remember seeing the first time. I think that might have been one of the first times I got introduced to this album, and what a way to kind of find out that this was coming out as well. Mourn is a little bit Killswitch Engage-ish in the way that track went, I thought, just kind of picking up on that a little bit. Warfare's a really good track. Birds of Prey, again, excellent. And Napalm Dreams at the end too. Great album, and it is my choice for my number 1 of Fit For An Autopsy's studio albums. Thanks as always for watching. Do drop a like and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff, if you're new to the channel, or however you want to proceed. Otherwise, from me, it's take care everybody, and bye for now.